Hey, good morning. Welcome back to the JeepSolid garage. So today we're going to continue on with the stroker build. Excited to make some more progress on this. Today we're going to be installing the piston rings onto the pistons. We're going to talk about gapping the rings, what that looks like, what to do if your gap is too small and you need to grind it down a little bit. This is all part of a series where I'm taking this 4-liter inline-6 engine and turning it into a stroker 4.6 liter using a crank out of a 4.2 258 engine, putting that in here with some oversized pistons. I had the machine shop bore this out 30 thousandths over. I have the oversized pistons and rings. Let's get to installing those. So here we have everything we need to install our rings onto our pistons, and this video is sponsored by Engine Tech. They're providing the parts for this stroker build, so be sure to check out Engine Tech's website, linked in the description below. I've got some gloves here because as I'm handling things, I don't want the oils and acids from my fingers getting on these parts. I want to keep everything as clean as possible. I've got all my rings set out here so far. This is the top ring, top compression ring, the second compression ring, the oil spacer, and then two rails here. You need a set of ring expanders. You got to use pliers like this to expand the ring to get it over the piston. We'll take a look at that. Some feeler gauges to check our gap. Your ring gap has to be just right, otherwise you can have malfunction. You can have big engine problems if you don't get this gap right. We'll talk about that more as we're putting these rings on. And of course our pistons, 30 thousandths over, that match up with the engine. And when you open up your box of rings, there'll be instructions on which groove goes where. So these rings are for the top groove, these are for the second groove, and this is for the bottom groove. They should also come with instructions on gapping from your manufacturer or in your service manual. So I'm going to start out with piston number 1 for cylinder number 1 right here, and I have all the rings laid out in order. This is my top ring, second ring, my spacer, and two rails for the bottom ring on the piston. The top ring, there's no markings on it. It's not directional. It can go either way, top or bottom. The second ring here, you'll notice there's a little tiny dot right there. Some rings will have a little dot on it, or some will say top, and that indicates which side of the ring goes up. Not that it's necessarily the top ring, it's just it means it goes that way up, not that way. And on my spacer, this one I'm going to install it so that the gap, where's the gap right here? I'm going to install it so that the two little prongs on that gap face up. And then my two rails here, these are not directional either. They don't have a dot or a top side to either one. We're going to start out by gapping our oil rings first, so let's do that. So I'm going to take the first rail. Did I call this a ring earlier? This is a rail. I'm going to just kind of squeeze it together a little bit. Drop it down in the cylinder there, rotate it down, and we have to have it square in there. So we're going to take the piston and just slide it down in there until it squares up that rail. Now we're going to feel our gap here. We've got our feeler gauges here, and I want this, 18 to 20. Let me try 19 here real quick. All we're going to do is slide this in here. That's a little too loose. So let's try the 20. Yeah, that feels just right. So you can see here on the feeler gauges, they're all different size, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. 20, this one fit pretty good. And all you're doing is feeling it in that little gap right there, and it should fit just snug, not super tight that you can't get it in and out, but you want to just not have any wiggle room. So that feels just right. And let's repeat that process for the other rail. These are both part of the oil ring. Square it up. And I should have left that 20 out. There it is. Good guess. Find my 20, feel it in there. Yeah, it feels good as well. So we'll pull this out. Here I'm going to refer back to my service manual. So piston ring in gap, the compression rings and oil rings. So on the compression, it's 10 to 20 thousandths. The oil ring is 10 to 25 thousandths. All right, let's move on to our top compression ring here. So whatever rings you get, follow the instructions that come with them. Refer to your service manual. Different rings, like you can even have rings that have a different clearance on the first ring and second ring. So just be very mindful of this. If you get your gap wrong, if your gap is too tight, as the ring heats up, you can actually cause engine damage. If you don't have enough room for that ring to expand and close up, if there's not enough of a gap there, you can actually have warping of that ring and it can cause engine damage, all kinds of trouble. So here I'm squaring up ring number 1, and let's see what my gap is here. So my top ring here, I'm actually looking for a gap here of 20, where's 20? There's 20 thousandths, and this doesn't fit in. Let's see how far off it is. Let's go down to 18. No. So this gap is incorrect, not nearly wide enough. Here's a 13. That just barely fits in. Yeah, it's 13 thousandths. So that is not enough. I need to shave this gap down. I need to open that gap up. That's not enough. That's where I was talking about the ring. As the engine heats up, it will actually expand and can actually end up pushing on itself, causing warpage, engine damage. You don't want that. So let's increase our gap there a little bit. Sorry, a brief intermission from this. So my daughter comes home. Hey Dad, I'm gonna go riding. Like, is that okay? Can I take the Jeep and the bike? Right? Mm-hmm. Are you going riding?
Yes.
Wish I could go, but no, I gotta talk about compression rings and gaps. Still, that's a cool setup. And I mentioned my Jeep I just painted. So happy with how it turned out. All right, back at it. Let's gap this ring. All right, so we're gonna take our ring over to our fancy schmancy little grinder here. And you can order this off of Amazon. I'll put a link in the description below. If you're doing a rebuild like this, it's worth buying. This is like 30 something bucks. It's worth buying a few extra little tools like this to make sure you get everything just right. The nice thing about this grinder, it's got these 2 little pegs on the back. You put your ring up against that so that when you grind it nice and square. Obviously keeps it flat on the surface there, a nice square grinding. If you don't want to buy that, you can be as crude as just taking a regular file, putting it in a clamp, and grinding your ring that way. But for 30 bucks, I think it's worth having a tool like this. Make sure you get a nice clean job done. So I'm going to start out by grinding a little bit on each end. You don't want to overdo it. Remember, I was at what, 13 thousandths, and I want to go up to 20 thousandths. So not a whole lot. I'm going to grind a little bit on that side, a little bit on this side, and then we're going to remeasure. We don't want to overdo it, because if you overdo it on the gap, it's really hard to put material back on. But we can always take a little bit extra off. So we were at 13. Let's see if we made any progress. And let's go up to 14. Oh yeah, 14 fits in. Didn't take much to take a thousandths off of there. 15. Oh, 15 works. Let's try 16. Where's my 16? Yeah, let's just jump to 17. Oh, 17 is pretty darn close. Not quite there though. We gotta take a little more off. After going back and forth a few times, I've got it at 20 thousandths, right where I want it. Now I'm just going to take a little file, make sure there's no burrs on here. I'm not hardly taking off any material here. Just making sure that there's no burrs that are going to catch on the cylinder wall here. And with that, here's my 20 thousandths gauge. This is what I was going for. Fits in there just right. All right, after going back and forth a few times, like I said, you don't want to take off too much material, so I did a few trips. Got all of my rings gapped now, so we can start installing them on piston number 1. I'm going to start with my oil spacer here. And with the spacer, like I said, I want the little ridge going up. These guys, on your spacer for your oil ring, you can just kind of slide these guys on. A little bit of dust there. Keep everything as clean as possible. We're going to just hook this bottom edge in, slide it in there, and these are malleable enough that you can just slide them on like that. And the rails, got a top rail and bottom rail. These do not have any dots or top marks on them. They're fairly thin, so same thing. Make sure you get it on the bottom. Just kind of slide this guy in. I'm trying not to scratch the piston at all as I drag it around. I think what do they call this, spiraling it in. Oh, here's a good example of the ring overlapping. Let me show you this real quick. So I should have checked before I put that bottom rail on, but you can see right here, the oil spacer, it's kind of overlapped over the top of itself. You gotta watch out for that. I gotta just kind of pull this guy. I'm gonna get a little screwdriver in there and just kind of open that guy up, slide it back. We'll pop this guy down where he belongs. There we go. Make sure your ring's not overlapped over the top of itself. We can go ahead and put we got the bottom rail on, let's put the top rail. And now we're gonna pay attention to where these ring gaps are. So, where is the break in my rail? The break in my rail is right there. So I want this bottom rail, about an inch, inch and a half off to one side. The top rail, we want inch, inch and a half off to the other side. Just like that. Okay, now this part always makes me a little nervous. So I've got ring number 2, got my dot, so I know that's the top. I'm always nervous about breaking these because you can break piston rings by overstretching them. Get yourself a good wrench like this. It'll be linked in the description below. Just gonna open it up, slide it down into place, drop it in, easy. Verify my dot is on the top because this one is directional. The lip of it is beveled a little bit, where this guy is not directional. Doesn't matter which way it goes. So we can grab onto it, get this guy on as well. And with that, so I've got my 2 ring gaps, those big gaps right there. We're gonna rotate the rings a little bit so they're on opposite sides of each other. Even though they will spin in the cylinder a little bit, it's a good habit to start those at the opposite ends. You can see I've got a little bit of oil on here. My pistons had a little bit of oil on them to start with. Before we install them into the engine though, we're gonna lube everything up real good. And piston number 1 is done. If you guys have tips or tricks, things I'm not covering in this video, please leave a comment down below. Let me know because it really helps other viewers out as they have questions. They look below at those comments and get answers to different things. Be sure to check out the links in the description below for some of these tools that I went over. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'm gonna go through the rest of these not on camera because it's the same process. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Thank you guys so much for watching. Have a good day.